So, Henry, who is next in the Russian roulette line?
You.
Is it my turn?
So
I'm
making it your turn.
I want to ask you this because I've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. I think I'm going to talk about the next set of movies,
the magnum opus
of the movies,
the second,
and then I'm going to pass out because I'm literally on. So what I originally was going to talk about was Blackenstein, which is a great blaxploitation Frankenstein adaptation.
I have it on Blu-ray right here.
Yes, so do I. Nice. From Severin. It's an excellent movie. Not quite as layered as Abby, but it's good.
Thank God we're talking about it after Bill left because he hates.
Yeah.
It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. That's what I always say.
It's okay to be wrong.
But
Bill's gonna listen to this later and just be like,
This is how me and Bill relate, so it's all good.
But what I'm actually going to talk about, as Henry says, is the magnum opus of what I was going to talk about, which is the Blade trilogy, which I'm going to cover as one entity because it kind of is and it kind of isn't. No, it will literally be succinct. Trust me, because it's not it's not that big. So the Blade trilogy, it's kind of a phenomenon in terms of this category that we're talking about, because the behind the scenes, the creators, pretty much everything involving Blade, with the exception of the lead actor, Wesley Snipes, is pretty much white created. And the first movie was, in some ways in some ways wasn't, presented to be kind of accessible to that type of audience. It's very much part of like what I will call new metal types of cinema, where it's sort of, it's like post The Crow and it's pre The Matrix, where everyone's
definitely
wearing
Crow
black
influence.
Yeah, where it's like everyone's wearing black leather and it's hip, and there's all these like flashing lights and the edits are real fast and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it comes from that school.
Oh yeah.
Blade as a character, he was a comic book character that premiered in Tomb of Dracula #10, which was a Marvel monster book that they did in the 1970s. And the movie is originally pitched as kind of a separate entity to that. In fact, they kind of de-emphasized Marvel's presence in a lot of ways at that particular point in time, especially because it wasn't part of the conversation quite in the way that it is now.
Because Marvel movies were all trash back then.
Yeah. And so they just kind of advertised it as being this, hip action vampire movie that had Wesley Snipes as this cool character. Who also, Wesley Snipes' presentation, which, I mean, even if you've never seen these movies, pretty much everybody knows what Blade is supposed to look like. He wears sunglasses, he has swords, he has long leather jacket. That's not originally how he was presented in the comic books at all, but it became
the look they adapted was the 90s look from Midnight Suns. They did not adapt the Gene Colan design. They adapted
because I was going to say it kind of became his look, sort of like how Ghost Rider eventually became like leather with spikes and all this kind of, which is not originally what he looked like, but that was so. Each of the Blade movies is kind of their own thing. And I think that although they have a lot of white creators behind them, they're still very important to this kind of subgenre, because I think that it really kind of showed what these kinds of movies could do and what their kind of box office potential was, their commercial potential. It gets into some really cool, like kind of like mysticism and spiritualism in a lot of different places. The first movie is very kind of chaotic and action-oriented, and the second movie, I think, is where it really starts to get into like the occultism and the multiculturalism, and the cast in part 2 is very diverse, and the vampires are very diverse, and
the director wasn't American either.
Exactly, and I think that helps. And then on top of that, definitely. You also, when you get to the third one kind of forgets. Even the star forgets what made Blade connect with a lot of audiences, because Blade, his identity, as an African-American man, is very matter of fact in that first movie. I mean, it's part of his identity and it's important, but it's not something that he or the movie really harps on that much. They sort of make it this incidental, type of thing. And even then, he's surrounded in that first movie by white supporting characters. There's a white villain. There's a lot of that's kind of surrounding the whole process, but he, you know, he kind of stands on his own, and he's able to kind of there's a little bit of this outsiderness, this otherness. I think not only is it part of the story because he is a vampire that can walk in daytime and, you know, is mysterious, and but it's also, you know, it's also a racial identity type of thing too. It's really kind of talking about,
I think it is coded that way.
Yeah, it's very coded that way because I think that they were afraid in making these movies, in making it too charged by that kind of thing. And so they code all of the social commentary, you know, in that movie. And yeah, just I've always liked these movies. The third one not as much, but the first two I think are really memorable. And they're also the kinds of movies that even if people hate stuff based on comic books, they kind of agree, yeah, Blade's pretty awesome. You know, they kind of give that movie a pass because it mixes so many other genres and talks about so many different topics and things, and is able to cover these big kind of occult and supernatural and racial and social things all in a, you know, a 90 some minute action horror movie, which I think is really kind of quite a feat. Because even the way that they illustrate like the vampires, you know, underground world that they have, you know, it's very outside of the, you know, white America and kind of monolithic structures and all this kind of stuff. It's in very the vampires actually dwell in a lot of socially conscious places. They're in like working class, like meat packing.
Yeah, they've infiltrated. That's their thing.
And warehouses, and, you know, in places that, not saying the vampires are necessarily working class, but even if Blade is fighting against them, and there is a little bit of an elitism from them because most of the vampires in the movie are white or they're European, or, you know, they have those kind of flavorings, there's still a bit of like a, you know, they're still outsiders. So Blade's kind of doubling, you know, his outsiderness, both as his human identity and as his, you know, his supernatural identity, which is something that I think connects with a lot of people. And it sort of is more charged in that way than I think a lot of these other movies are, because up until, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the strength of that character in those movies and as a black character and within genre, I think is that he doesn't give a fuck. That's his strength. Like he walks through the world as an outsider and he doesn't give a fuck. And you know, that's like, he's proud to be a black man. He's not apologizing, nor is he sermonizing about it. He's just like, fuck you. I am, you know, and it's like, that's very refreshing to have that kind of empowerment, you know, without
absolutely
necessarily doing it in a well, to me, it wouldn't be too preachy, but maybe to some white people, it'd be too preachy if they went in a different direction. But you know,
well, it's interesting because I think a lot of comic books, you know, they're very into monologues and soliloquies, and, you know, and Blade is not quite that in these movies. He barely has any real, you know, speaking lines. Wesley Snipes does it more as a presence with a lot of swagger and, you know, and physicality and body language and all of these kinds of things. That's one of the reasons I think that he became so iconic as that part, is just because he brought so much of that don't give a fuck attitude, like, you know, like Henry said, that I just think it resonated with so many
you would have
people.
to be like that. If, I mean, because Blade was like that in the original Blade character was always like that. The difference is in the 70s there was the racial thing addressed because he was born, you know, he was born in a brothel, and his mother was a black woman vampirized by a rich white colonialist European guy with the white beard, not a young hipster like in the movie. That's what that to me is the biggest flaw.
Well,
adaptation wise, I think that's a big flaw.
I always kind of interpreted the Blade movies, even though I just kind of said where the vampires are in kind of working class structures, I've sort of interpreted the Blade movies as being about the fights that minorities have against like capitalism and imperialism in the society, because the way the vampires are structured just as a hierarchy is very like capitalist and you know, and imperialist and oppressive and almost dystopian, you know, because a lot of where they dwell is very kind of crumbling and falling apart and sort of almost vaguely sci-fi dystopia type of thing. And that's what and I think that's one of the, you know, the best vampires are always vampires who are coded from some kind of a societal anxiety. And I feel like a lot of what Blade does in these movies is he kind of fights against capitalism, but he sort of does it from within the system because, you know, after all, he is a vampire, you know, but
he's sort of
he's sort of a vampire. Yeah, he's a quasi vampire, but it's kind of the thing where I always felt I think the first movie, if it does anything well, it really gets that point across. You know, the elite vampires like Udo Kier's character.
Yeah, I was thinking about
they're very like you know, rich, hoity-toity. You know, they have the access to all the best technology and all this kind of stuff, and that's very, very much what these kinds of movies, you know, are about. It's about a man who is a minority who is essentially taking on the elites, so to speak, that are planning
single-handedly.
Who are planning to kind of kill the earth and vampirize the earth. That can be both literal, that could be metaphorical.
And it goes back to the Candyman thing, because even if he didn't have an attitude like he does, who's going to believe him? Because nobody's going to believe him. Nobody's going to help Blade. Blade's going to do it himself.
Yeah, and the Blade movies up until the third one don't really involve outside forces too often either, because it's just kind of it's an internal struggle, and it's you know, and they know that, kind of as the Rastafarians would say, they know that Babylon will not help them in these struggles.
Yeah.
So they kind of take it upon themselves, you know, to do that. And Blade very much becomes kind of a one-man mission and a one-man army against those oppressive forces. And that's the reason I think that these movies have connected as well. And I mean, even if it's 20, 30 years down the line.
Well, I think the second one has the nuance of having him bond with the female vampire, the female white vampire character.
Yeah.
And it's not a romantic bond, but you can kind of see that the seed is there, maybe. You can, if you want to interpret it that way. But at the very least, they've touched this humanity in each other.
Yeah.
And even with the shades on, when she dies, Snipes is able to communicate just with the rest of his face. This sadness, this like profound, like, why would I ever grieve a vampire? You know, why would I ever do that?
I think even though the vampires in the movie are sometimes sexualized, I don't think that the women in these movies are and I mean that in a good way. There are a lot more humanistic characters in these movies. They're not just kind of objects for Blade to ogle or anything of that nature. They're part of the team. They're helping him out. You know, the woman in the first one is a little bit of a damsel in distress, but there's not much of a sexual drive between them. It's not quite driven that way, at least. But
I think it was. It's intended to present this being a potential, because it fulfills a story function.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which, but not every story has to have a love interest, but 25 years ago, comic book, you probably have to have some kind of.
It kind of it treats them more like.
But it doesn't bloom.
Beings. Yeah, I was gonna say it treats them more like human beings, and Blade isn't just like this.
And Tracy Lords.
I was gonna
casting. Tracy Lords is not sexualized.
Yeah, well,
that was pretty brilliant.
Really, I was gonna say she really isn't. It's done. Everything in this movie is very matter of fact, and Blade kind of has actual connective relationships with people, especially in the first two. Kind of dance around Blade Trinity, because Blade Trinity, for those who haven't seen it, really isn't very good at all. But it kind of gets lumped in with these movies because it's still thematically tied to them. Wesley Snipes is still in them, but really the first two are what matter. And I feel the first movie,
the third movie decides, after the second movie goes and does its own thing very successfully, critically and commercially. The third movie decides, because Goyer, the writer, was also a comic book writer. Goyer decides, well, you know what? After all, I'm going to go ahead and adapt to Dracula. After all, kind of distancing himself away from it. And so he brings in characters and concepts from the comic book, but the way he does it is pretty poor at adapting. Very poor. And to me, the best parts of the third movie really are just character bits that are humored by I think Ryan Reynolds and Parker Posey are funny.
Oh yeah.
And that's it. I don't think they function well as action or horror. But they're funny. They're funny
Blade
characters.
Trinity is the only one of those movies where Blade really isn't center stage.
Right.
And Blade is actually kind of, Wesley Snipes is kind of disengaged and disinteresting. Whereas in the other two, you can't keep your eyes off him. I mean, he does these fight sequences very elegantly. I mean, there's a fight in 2 between him and these like vampire ninjas that almost has no music, no nothing, and it's just them fight, and it's incredible.
Well, he was a real martial artist. I don't know if he still is. But...
yeah, so was that Michael Jai White, who was Spawn in the Spawn movie, and he played Bronze Tiger in the Arrowverse. He's a martial artist as well.
He is. Well, he played Black Dynamite.
Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, you're right.
You know, he's a martial artist, and I feel bad for Michael Jai White because he's aging out of those roles.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean his appearance. I don't mean his. I'm sure he can still kick anybody's ass. That's an issue.
Oh yeah, he can kick my ass.
He still isn't that great an actor, but he does have a lot of charisma. He does have a lot of charisma.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and the thing is, he's aging out of these kind of parts, but he's always. Yeah. Whenever I see an interview with him, he's like, "I'm finally gonna do this big superhero role." Like he's already done a few, but he's still not satisfied because he never got to that level iconic like Wesley Snipes.
Oh yeah.
It's like he's wanting it so bad.
I mean, Wesley Snipes' career after Blade Trinity is almost non-existent for personal reasons mostly. But
well, it's funny because before that, he was a serious dramatic actor, alternating with an action actor.
And nowadays he's kind of remembered as Blade. That's what people that they go Wesley Snipes.
They give him shitty parts now.
So much so that he is on the What We Do in the Shadows television show as Wesley Snipes, a vampire, is what they do.
But what's funny is, I think it's just goes back to racism in Hollywood. It's like, how many people in Hollywood are involved in serious, heavy criminal activity? Probably thousands and thousands. So they get this one guy who evaded his income tax, and they put him in prison for 2 years.
Oh yeah.
At the height of his fame, they just destroyed him. You know, and Henry he never recovered. You know.
Yeah, and Henry, maybe you'll know the answer to this, or you might not, or maybe this is a non-existent. I believe when they were making the original Blade movie, they explored the possibility of just making him a white guy. And they said, "Oh no!" They said, "No, we, you know, I don't know who intervened and said, no, you really can't do that." But I think very briefly they toyed with that concept.
Blade had the leverage of the fact that nobody knew about the character outside of comic book readers and hardcore part. Nobody else knew about Blade. Everyone knew the X-Men. Everyone knew Spider-Man, Captain America. Nobody knew Blade, so it didn't matter ultimately to them or the audience how much they retained of the comic book and how much of it they just made out of whole cloth. But what it did is, I think it set a standard of quality overall. So when X-Men came along, it had to follow that quality, and it had to be hip in black leather because that was the thing. But it had to be close to the comic books, or Marvel was just going to give it up. Because Marvel had just gotten out of bankruptcy. Blade almost single-handedly saved Marvel.
Which I don't think
Blade single-handedly saved the Marvel comic book movie.
It doesn't get enough credit for that kind of thing, and I think the people sort of sleep on it because when you watch the first one, as much as I love the first one, it's a very dated movie in a lot of ways. But so they kind of dismiss it, you know. But I definitely think if anybody else watching this or in the group with us right now has not seen at least the first 2 Blade movies, you need to like pop on HBO Max, I think they're on there, and watch the first 2 Blade movies.
I think the second one is
morning
really
as the doctor says.
It's actually
Guillermo del Toro does it, so it's good.
I'm not. I know Kaylin is. I know you are. I'm not personally the biggest Del Toro fan as a filmmaker. No, I think he's an incredible guy. I think he's but his movies to me are very uneven quality wise, especially when he tries to be mainstream. When he doesn't need to, he kind of waters certain things down.
I agree.
And you know, he's kind of the mindset, and there's nothing wrong with this mindset. I just don't have it anymore. It's like the joy, the wonder of filmmaking, like when you're a kid. I haven't had that since I was a little kid. He has retained it. He kind of has this Spielbergian wonder, and I think sometimes it dilutes some of the more important things he's trying to say. That's just my opinion. Now, that having been said, I think The Shape of Water is a hard balancing act, but I think he does pull it off. And
That's such
Blade,
a great
though,
movie.
Blade is actually my favorite movie, Blade 2 of his, because it's like he was able to kind of tick off all these boxes. Like I can get as horror and weird and occult and obscure also, but I know it's going to make a lot of money. So there's no pressure on me to have like a Spielberg moment. He throws moments of pathos awkwardly into his movies, and not always awkwardly. Sometimes they're very successful. But
Blade 2 is kind of a Del Toro movie without the bullshit, basically, because it kind of just gets right to the nitty gritty of, you know,
it's
he doesn't
somewhere
overindulge
between.
himself.
It's a little more like Chronos than it is like Mimic or Pacific Rim. Because I think after the movies he tries to make in Spanish, he actually I think are more personal to him and they're better. I mean, I think the ones that are more flavored like fantasy, coded that way, like Shape of Water, Pan's Labyrinth. But to me personally, Mimic and especially Pacific Rim, I think they're just terrible movies. I think they're more terrible because I know he can do better. But he chooses to water down his message because he does believe that it's okay to have the wonder of filmmaking and the fun. It's like, yeah, but storytelling is important too, and Marisa
I want to do a whole
episode.
I want to do a whole episode where, in that tone of voice, you talk about the wonder of filmmaking. I think
I want to
oh
see
my
a
God.
documentary where Del Toro talks about it with his accent.
The wonder.
I would also love to see that. That would be incredible.
Filmmaking.
But when you get into Del Toro and you see the movies that he promotes on Blu-ray and DVD, then you're in a different universe because he's promoting Alucarda and Jean Lopez Moctezuma and the Panic movement.
He's
and
like
Jodorowsky, and he's just like we are. He's just like
he's a much
Fanboy
cooler
time.
Quentin
It's precious.
Tarantino. That's the way I always say. He's a much cooler Quentin Tarantino. Yeah,
right. He has done what Tarantino has kind of pretended to do, which is elevate elevate the underground. Tarantino, after Jackie Brown, he stopped casting cult actors. He only cast Hollywood actors. Yeah. And I was I thought you were always, I thought
that's one thing. That's one thing that I will give Rob Zombie credit for doing.
Yeah, Rob Zombie does do that.
Is that he casts, and still to this day, casts almost strictly cult movie actors.
But Rob Zombie has some problems. He's not a very good writer. If he had
if
he could partner with somebody, if he would get a co-writer, he could do so much better work.
Oh yeah.
It's obviously he's capable of it, but it's like, I'd rather just do a movie with my wife where I say fuck 5,000 times and have lots of really perverted death. And
don't we all want to make a movie like that in our lives?
Yeah, but that's the only movie he makes. That's a problem. It's
hey, if I had the money, I'd call my wife and be like, "Do you just want to make another movie where we say fuck 4,000 times?" Sure, all right.
This is another area where I have controversial opinions. People who love Rob Zombie, I say these things I just said, and I mean them. I don't have much respect for him as a filmmaker or as talent-wise. But I don't doubt his love of that stuff. That being said, I know people who hate Rob Zombie who, when I say I really genuinely do love The Devil's Rejects, they get mad as hell at me. You just said he was a fucking hack. How can you like Devil's Rejects? I'm like, it's one work. He nailed it. Everybody has maybe one masterpiece if you're lucky.
I was going to say, I think that everyone is entitled to one masterpiece in their life.
And then
it doesn't matter what else you do because you did that masterpiece. So you can just ride out.
That's fair.
It's when he did 3 from Hell and he did the double feature. I went to that in Charlotte.
The quality drop. Yeah.
Yes. Devil's Rejects was playing. Everyone was psyched. Even some people I knew who weren't even that into Rob Zombie. They were, when that 3 from Hell came on, everyone turned off, even his hardest fan. By the end of that movie, they were either bored, leaving, or cursing, or mad, or snoozing. And my friend who was with me loved his stuff. And she was like, this movie is shit. It's absolute shit. And I was like, I know. I mean, there's not a minute of 3 from Hell that has any entertainment value unless you get some kind of nostalgic pleasure, sadly, tragically, of seeing a dying Sid Haig do his last acting.
That's true.
That's a mixed blessing. It's like,
by the way, can I say one thing that's on topic about Sid Haig? I watched a bunch of Pam Grier blaxploitation movies recently. I watched like a ton of them, because I had never
Sid
seen
Haig is in.
I was gonna say like movies like Black Mama, White Mama, and all these movies. And Sid Haig is in every single one of those movies, and he's playing a different ethnicity in every single one of those movies as well. And it was. I'm like,
have you
Sid
seen
Haig
The
is
Big
in all of these
Birdcage yet?
movies? No, I have not watched
The
that
Big
yet.
Birdcage is like, to me, the Jack Hill, Pam Grier, like holy grail. I mean, it's like, because it's before Foxy Brown.
I've seen
still
Foxy
doing
Brown.
all these women in prison movies. Roger Corman was sending them to the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's got Sid Haig, but in that movie, they're not really the main characters as far as the action. All the women in prison are, but they're what the movie's about. They're this revolutionary, and they're a couple. It's the only movie where they are lovers. And you know, it's Jack Hill deliberately made it not known to Roger Corman, really. Not that he really cared, but he made it to parody those movies.
Yeah.
While they were at their height of popularity, he made fun of those movies.
Yeah.
And so Sid Haig and Pam Grier are like the Greek chorus who are watching. They're the heroes, but they're like watching all the tropes unfold. And then finally Sid Haig gets involved in it because he has to go undercover with these guards. And of course, it's just like all white people are racist in most blaxploitation movies. So in the women in prison movies, all the guards are gay who are total misogynists. So Sid Haig, and of course, since it's filmed in the Philippines, Vic Diaz plays the main guard.
Of course, because
so
why would
Diaz, and he's like, oh my God, the whole movie. And so Sid Haig's like, because they really think they're revolutionaries, but they're really not. They're of the era where everybody Viva la Revolution, it's kind of parody that too, and so their characters are named Django and Blossom. That's Sid Haig and Pam Grier. And so finally that's
my drag name now. Django Blossom is gonna be my drag name.
He's got to free Blossom because she goes undercover. And of course, when she goes undercover, the first thing she does is she beats the shit out of all the other women. Of course,
because why wouldn't
they're bad, And then they finally start torturing her and torturing the girls. And so she has to be rescued. So he's madly in love with Blossom. She's his woman. So he takes one for the team of heteros. He goes undercover as a gay security guard. And
the team of heteros.
I'm making fun of it. I'm not part of it.
Heteros.
The team of heteros.
You have to put O apostrophe like it's Irish.
I'm making fun of it.
Honey Nut Heteros.
Honey Nut. I got it from Jimmy Dore, because Jimmy Dore made fun of Bill Maher when he said, yeah, I should be against the vaccine mandates because I'm a liberal leftist, but I'm going to take one for the team and do it anyway. And I was like,
Team O heteros.
I was like, you're gonna. I was Jimmy Dore's face, like
I was like,
probably saw it just collapses. He's like, take one for the team, Bill Maher.
I was 4 Pam Grier movies in, and Sid Haig shows up, and I'm like, how many fucking movies has Sid Haig made in his life? I was like, this is literally, it was like fucking, I always say, you can find 2 actors who at some point in their life have made every movie ever made. Sid Haig and John Carradine. John Carradine is in every movie up until 1983, literally. Like
every movie.
Sid Haig is one of those people. Yeah. My mom was a movie theater worker in the early 60s in Burlington, North Carolina. Hole in the wall, and she watched everything, and she loved the gossip magazine. She collected True Detective, and she's like, but sometimes the gory parts would scare me, so I'd fold the page, and I'm like, but there's no pictures. She's like, oh, I'd always fold the pictures. I'm like, yeah, but you're folding like the pros. Why are you doing that? She's like, it's a mental thing. And so she had hundreds of books, and she was not a hippie. She was a silent generation. But she had all the books: Jacqueline Suzanne, Valley of the Dolls, The Exorcist by Blatty, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, all the ones with the most extreme sex scenes you can possibly imagine in these movies. And of course, little me, I would sneak and read them. I'm like, oh my God, this is disgusting. I would still read them. They didn't turn me on, but they didn't turn me off either. But I wouldn't have told her they didn't turn me on. I'd be like, oh yeah. But then when she became born again, then she threw them all away and became a mean person and abusive. So that just goes to show you. But anyway, during that era, she knew every actor. by name. I knew all the soap opera actors by name. That's how I learned all the movie actors. Sid Haig, I first heard of him when I was like 4 years old. He was on some TV show like Mannix or Barnaby Jones. She's like, that's Sid Haig. He's in a lot of movies in the Philippines. He's losing his hair and sometimes he wears a wig, but he's got a cool mustache. He's okay. He's kind of cool. And okay, I'm 4 years old and I'm like, hey, thanks for, is it a wonder I turned out like this?
Yeah, well, no, I'm not a wonder. So on that note, with what I want you guys to take out of this is to watch Blade, to watch Sid Haig movies and John Carradine movies. You can even watch them all at once. I don't care. Watch one on a phone, one on a computer, one on a television.
So every single movie up until
and do a drinking game. How many times Sid Haig appears? Things like that, and you will be well for that. In the meantime, before I crumble to dust, I'm going to call tonight a night, folks. And listen, I hope that everybody has a good time and good health, and tip your waitress and like and subscribe. And
like some of that Blade stuff is, you were saying like, well, he was just a character or just being who he was. And like, that is, again, because of the topics that we're speaking about, I'm able to put in my perspective as a Black person. So I'm able to really tell you what that was, what's going on there. Like, say, The Blade, or even what was the other movie you were talking about with the
Candyman?
Candyman?
Yeah, even Candyman, or even like the Michael J. White character. What was he? Who he played? Spawn.
Oh yeah, Spawn.
Right, Spawn. So all of those characters were they were Black, but they were Black men outside of the white gaze and outside of and so I look at it from this standpoint. For you guys to say that tells me that you're aware of the white gaze and you're aware when we don't care about it, and that makes white people very nervous that we don't care.
I encourage all my Black friends to not care about it.
No, I mean, you can encourage us, but when you're born into a system where that is the thing, when you don't care, that's what makes them nervous. When you were your own person, when you were your own thing. Sure. So for Blade to just be like, I'm just here to kick ass and take names, I'm not here to get hung up on or stumble over the awareness of my Blackness. Like, I shouldn't be aware of it. I should just be a person doing my own thing. I'm just doing it. This is what I'm doing. Sure. I'm here to, kill vampires who are trying to overrun the world. If I have to worry about like coddling white people while I'm trying to save the world, like how far are we going to go there? So he's just a character. He's a superhero, and superheroes are not aware of those things. They're aware of their superpower, and that's what they're leaning into. So I think
their mission.
Right. Or their mission.
Their
that's an important
or whatever
thing.
They have,
Right. And they're not steeped in the tropes that are being put on them, because these are tropes, and if we wear them, then we become them. And when you don't want to wear those things anymore, then you're confusing. People try to figure you out. Who are you? Well, are you a lefty? Are you a righty? I mean, you understand what I'm saying, right?
I do, and I do think though. I think if a good writer is able to do both, though,
right,
it's some pretty rich stuff there that you can tap into. And
there's a lot.
Sometimes it's there and they don't realize they're doing it. Like in Blade, it probably wasn't conscious. In Candyman, I'm sure it's 100% conscious. And I mean,
Candyman had a lot of.
I mean, it was like it couldn't be less conscious. I mean, but I think Clive Barker made a decision to go, you know what? Let's just urban myths are bigger in America. Let's just go into America. Let's go into poor neighborhoods. It probably wasn't even so much a racial thing. I mean, I'm sure he studied it. He's a brilliant guy.
Right.
And the little bit of snippets of interviews I've read with him about Candyman is that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to take that idea that he wrote on one level, on a more conceptual level, and localize it to a certain experience with adding in like these kind of gothic tropes,
Right. I mean, I think that was important, but then to sort of overlay that with the Black community and poverty and gentrification, like these are real things that communities are still dealing with even today. And then you throw on top of this other trope of white men's fears that Black men like this birth of a nation type of thing going on. Do you know what I mean? So there's so much of that that's in there, and then them saying they don't want race mixing, but it was white men that raped Black women for centuries, mixing the races. Like, this is not something
Well,
that
I mean,
they did.
Clive
you know
Barker is
saying?
aware of this. I mean, his husband is a Black man. I mean, you know, they're pretty much, you know what I mean? In other words, I think he's aware that these elements were real and are toxic.
Yeah.
But I
And
want to
do
layer
touch
it
on
within the
some
story and do something that, and it's hard.
That's what I love about it.
I'm a writer. It's hard to do. It's hard to do magical realism. It's hard to take social consciousness, socio-political, and like I call a lot of what I write socio-political cosmic horror with a lot of soap opera. And I mean, because you know, I have the politics, I have the romance, but I also have the fantasy, and it's taken me years to be able to get. I think I'm good at it now, but I'm old. I've been writing these stories since I was a little kid. And it takes a lot of, I had to have more lived experience and vicarious lived experience through the other, you know, woman, Black, white, gay, it doesn't matter. And that has significantly altered my story. And then when I went super leftist for the second time, then my story kind of really found its heartbeat. I was like, what I was finding is my story was always intended to head toward a revolution and a dystopia. But you know, I got to a point where around the time of the Sanders campaign, which was I believe it was a nexus point in human consciousness. I'm not crediting Sanders specifically as a human, but it really was. The world changed, the dialogue changed around the world. And when I started writing parts of my story, then it became more political. And then what I noticed that bothered me at first, and still kind of does, is that real life is outpacing me. We're closer to the Armageddon in real life than we are in my story now. Like I've been 5 minutes to midnight on my story for like 20 years, and now in real life we're 2 minutes to midnight, and it's like, damn.